Welcome to On the Line. I'm Christine Williams. Coming up for discussion on our Viewpoints Hour. There's been a green shift. Now Elizabeth May has been granted a voice in national televised debates. Our world changed after 9/11. 7 years later today, do you think we've become paranoid? And are you comfortable with armed officers in high-risk schools? Stay tuned. And these are the issues we're presenting today to our Viewpoints guests for commentary. Green Party leader Elizabeth May, she's now got her wish, an equal voice in national televised debates. Do you agree with this change of heart? It's the 7th anniversary of 9/11, a day that changed the world. Given anti-terror laws and airport security measures, do you think they are justified, or have we become too paranoid? And 2 Toronto Public Board trustees have put their foot down on a proposal to station armed police officers in high schools in their wards. Now let's meet our Viewpoints guests to talk about our subject matters today. Paul McKeever is leader of the Freedom Party of Ontario, and Al Kirouac is publisher for the Halton Herald. And you, the viewer, we want to hear from you because you are our third guest. Feel free to call in at any time with any of your comments, which brings us to the first story today. And I called it a green shift. Elizabeth May, here it is. Greens to be in debates. That struck a chord with many people a few days ago when Elizabeth May was, according to many sources in the media, ganged up on. It went something like this in short. Stephen Harper didn't want to appear on televised debates with her, so Stéphane Dion said, well, if Stephen Harper's not going to be on debating with her, well, then I'm not going to be part of that either. And Jack Layton jumped on board, Parti Québécois, and before you knew it, nobody wanted to be on TV, national debates with Elizabeth May. She got mad, and so mad, in fact, that she threatened court action. Ever since, there's been a shift. Stephen Harper says he will have that debate with her, and all the other party members, leaders, have conceded as well. And the question that we're asking you, according to many newspaper reports, they're saying that you, our public, you got angry about that. You thought that she should be given an equal voice in those debates. So why was everybody scared about it? But we're asking you the question on the line today. Do you believe that she should be part of those televised debates? Now, of course, we're going to hear from our guest today, but we want to hear your input as well. So call in at any time and let us know what your point of view is. And for this one, I'm going to start with you.
Right.
Paul, do you think she should be part of these debates?
I do. Not necessarily in the way she got on. I think what happened there was the consortium used the excuse that, well, some parties don't want them on and our hands are tied. And they didn't want them on either. The consortium did not want the Greens on. But when the leaders said, well, you know what, she can be on, they were stuck. They had to let her on because their excuse had gone out the window. Of course, the only reason the party leaders had changed their mind was because she raised the sexism card, and they didn't want to be smeared for this entire election, falsely and wrongly, by the way, as being somehow sexist. So, she played her card, it worked, she's on, but we are still left with a situation where there is no principled approach to determining who's on the debate. I think the appropriate thing to do, given that every frequency, every channel is ultimately a state property that's licensed to a private company, I think the appropriate way to do this is to say, look, these are potential prime ministers that we're looking at. If they don't have parties, or if they're not running a slate of candidates that's at least great enough to form a majority government, then we know they can't be a prime minister, so they shouldn't be there. So to my mind, the clear line is not, are you registered or any of these other things, how well did you do in the last election or anything. The real key is, can you put together an organization that is running 50% plus one of the seats in Canada? And that is no small feat. That's a hugely difficult thing to do, but it does demonstrate that you are potentially a prime minister and you deserve to be on that stage.
Paul, you think it was the sexism card that got her in?
It unfortunately was, but she's on, and that's the right conclusion. The way she got on is not the way what if there's a male leader of the Greens next time? It's not going to work again.
Okay. Al?
Well, I mean, I was one of the people that were angry at first, and I was led to believe it was the media consortium that
Why
was...
are you angry, first of all? Why are you angry
Well,
that
I mean,
she wasn't being allowed on?
any time that a political candidate or a party is purposely omitted from a debate, I mean, that's of some concern of mine. But what was a bigger concern was I was led to believe when I was reading the CBC article that it was the media consortium that made the decision that she wasn't going to go on. And my immediate reaction was, why are we letting the media decide who gets to be present at these debates? And so I was a little concerned about that. My other concern that I share with you both is that now how do we deal with this, and how do we develop a system that is open, that is fair, unbiased, and allows all candidates, all party candidates, to interact, and it's a great opportunity for Canadian public to get some insight and see how these leaders will perhaps not only react at the debate, but if they do get into office, if they are elected, or if parts of their or rather members of their party get elected. So I think it's something that really needs to be further developed, and we've got to be open to changing that system. Because the last thing I want, I mean, let's face it, we've got basically now it's a 2 or 3 party system, and candidates are always trying to persuade the voters to go from one to the other, and the wave seems to go just like that. So I think we need to further develop it. And
it's certainly going to heat up, and we'll be talking about some of that politics pretty soon. But for you watching, we want to know, when you heard in the news that Elizabeth May was being shut out of those debates, did it strike a chord with you? We'd like to know how you feel about this matter. Now, it's come up on the front pages that she is going to be allowed after all. Are you happy to see it? Let's go now to you, Gail, on line 4. Hi, Gail, you're on the line.
I think she's 100% right that she got in, you know, to speak in the debate, because there are 3 other candidates. And they just have the equal right as she does, you know.
Yes. Okay, Gail, thanks for calling in and sharing that. Now, there's one question I have for the two of you, and for you watching. As far as I know, she's making history here, because televised debates are a natural part of our election process. The leaders get up there, they're challenged before the public. But have any of you out there, and you, ever heard of a party leader that really didn't have official party status, no members of parliament, going there before a televised debate and joining in? Or is Elizabeth May making history on this one?
Well, official party status is usually related to having a certain number of members in the
Member of
House.
Parliament, yes.
And I guess Joe Clark of the Progressive Conservative Party, they only had 2 seats coming out of the 2003 election, and I believe they were allowed onto the debate floor nonetheless the next time out, even though 2 seats does not an official party make within the parliamentary system. In any event, I mean, all these parties are registered, but that's a separate matter from being official, as that term is meant.
Yes, and in her case, she doesn't have members there.
How do you?
It's a concern for you, Zara?
It's a concern. I mean, I'm on both sides of the issue, and you know, on the other side of the issue, we've got to deal with. She isn't an elected representative. None of her members are elected representatives. So if we open the door to her, then how do we stop that floodgate?
How do we stop that floodgate? You see, this is critical because, in my opinion, and I'd like to know how the two of you feel about this, in the debates that followed, plus it was mentioned in more than one article that Jack Layton, even his Facebook, it was flooded with even his own supporters and some members within his own party saying, you know, how dare you? Why would you leave out Elizabeth May? Yet at the same time, there's that question of, she doesn't have any members of parliament, so is this a privilege that she has seen that nobody else has? Yes.
I disagree entirely with how many members of parliament you have, and the reason is this: nobody has any members of parliament as soon as the parliament is dissolved. That's the whole point.
Interesting.
Nobody is a member right now.
Interesting point.
And you know, if the point of the debate is to debate ideas, then surely we don't say, well, because the ideas discussed 4 years ago got these people into the legislature 4 years ago, they are still the ones who have the, I mean, hopefully they're talking about different ideas now. So the ideas are old ideas that they had that got them in. There's no reason to believe that their new ideas are worthy of, you know, a seat. And so I think we have to have a criterion that says, Past performance is no indicator of future performance. What matters is, have you brought enough members, have you brought enough candidates to the floor to be taken seriously as, remember, these are people, not just members of parties, these are the people who would, if they had a majority of seats in the Parliament, be appointed by the Governor-General as Prime Minister of Canada. So this is really a pre-prime ministerial debate. And the only people I think you can truly exclude in a principled way are those who mathematically could not be Prime Minister. And believe it or not, there will be very few parties that will manage to get 50 seats plus one. I've run in several elections. I've been the leader of a political party in 2 of them. And in neither of them, because we are a small political party, have we managed to get 50% plus one. And I would argue that on that basis, we would not have been justly included in a leaders debate. 50% plus one is difficult, and very few parties achieve it. I think it's a natural and perfect way of drawing the line.
Now that's interesting, because it leads right into the question I was going to ask you, the 2 of you developed, about Al's very legitimate concern. How do you control those floodgates? Plus, to take this into consideration, now Elizabeth May, the Green Party, that platform says it all. But what about the new Liberal Green shift? A little bit of overlap there, and how does this play in? We'd like to know what you think about this situation. Do you agree that Elizabeth May, do you want to see her in the national televised debates? We want to hear from you. We're going to go for a break. We'll return after this. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Viewpoints on the Line. Asking you the question, do you think Elizabeth May should be a part of the national televised debates? Do you want to see her on that platform? Question for the 2 of you, first of all, before we go back to where you draw that line. What do you think was behind her being left out of the picture in the first place? All kinds of speculation in the opinions, the editorials. What do you think was really behind that?
I think the consortium has a lot more power than they let on. It's not that the parties get to choose. The consortium is representing, it's the front end of a lot of business interests and union interests even, and it decides who they want on because they're trying to protect the rights, privileges, et cetera. They don't want change of any dramatic sort. They can deal with a little bit of change, but they don't want big changes. And so if you let somebody on like the Greens who are proposing, perhaps major changes, even if they don't know what those changes might be, they might say, unpredictable, we don't like unpredictability, we know we've got our thumb on the Conservatives, the Liberals, and the NDP, and we don't even have to worry about the NDP too much, we know they're not going to win. We've got our thumb on these two big ones, we don't want to bring in new people. So these rules will have to come from without, they will not come from the consortium. And when people like Andrew Coyne say, we need a third party to set the rules, I think he's absolutely right.
Yes.
Well, I think it was more, media loves a show, so I don't think it's too much of an issue. Although I think that, there's a definite threat of stealing votes away from the two parties, and this is going to be a tight race, and or the three parties, let's say. And it's going to be a tight race, and I think that had a lot to do with it. Not so much through the consortium, but through the political backbenches of each party, and it's a threat. It's a definite threat.
Now, on the note of what you're saying there, Stephen Harper was the one that was identified by many newspapers as being the one that started this whole thing, saying, I don't want to be on a national debate with her. There may be a gang up. I don't know what the reason was. You see one thing in one paper, you see a different slant in another. But whatever was behind that reason, do you believe it started there? That's how it seems to be.
Yeah.
And then came news that Dion was saying, well, if he doesn't want to argue with her on national TV, I don't either.
Yeah, I don't think it did, frankly.
You don't think it started with him? He was just being... Al, you got a smile on your face. What do you think?
I think
here?
it did. Let's face
with him?
it. He's been labeled the control freak of the Conservatives by some of his own members. And, Turner's a prime example. He's given us some keen insight into the mind makings of
So did he prove himself not to be a control freak by changing?
Why would anybody even, especially a prime minister, saying, I'm not going to go to debate because somebody's going to be there? That is ridiculous. That to me is like, what are you doing representing us? We want to hear. Are you scared that they're going to raise some issues that you don't want to talk about or deal with? And that's a big concern of mine.
I don't think he's at all scared. I don't think they share the same constituency, but I think what he was afraid of, if he was afraid of anything, was that in the past, recent past, there was a deal between the Liberals and the Greens that the Liberals would not run against Elizabeth May in her home riding. And in exchange, Elizabeth May said, I think Stéphane Dion should be the next Prime Minister. She said that. So I think, there's this thing called oath helping. The idea is, if Stéphane Dion's up there saying I should be the next Prime Minister and she says, I agree, well, what kind of debate is that? And you've got sort of a 2 against 1 thing going on there. I think it was a fair criticism, although I have to say at the end of the day, I don't think it's going to matter. In fact, I think that Stéphane Dion, by not taking a stand against her being on the stage, has just given the majority to the Conservative government.
Interesting, because the next question would have been, if she's touting Stéphane Dion, then why is it that he was against her being part of the debate? Because Harper didn't want to be part of it.
That's, I think,
Where was do you see this overlap between the green shift to raise these billions of dollars through carbon tax? Do you see any problem there with that overlap between the Liberals and the Green Party?
From my perspective, no, but that's because I think these policies are all suicidal. So
the whole green thing.
The idea of taxing or regulating the things that we exhale, I think, is insane. But it's caught on. It's become popular due to some misgivings given out in that popular movie by the former vice president, and so they're all jumping on it right now, except the Conservatives. Yes. And so the more ways they split that, we're going to tax carbon, regulate carbon, take away your car, take away. Hey, the more parties are saying that, the fewer of them will ever actually achieve it. You're taking that CO2 thing, splitting it 10 ways to Sunday, and leaving the Conservatives all of the rest of the vote. So I think it really works out well for the Conservatives.
Yes. What about you, Al?
I'd have to agree with them that Canadians feel overtaxed, and any threat or any suggestion of increased taxes is going to be detrimental to anyone proposing it. And so it's a catch-22. And
you
I think the Green
yes.
movement is a lot smaller.
Ask you, do you think the Green movement is really resonating with Canadians? Do you think that?
I think with a certain segment of the population, yes, and I think it's very small. I think we're all concerned, but how do you deal with it? It's a huge elephant, and we're just now all becoming aware of it. And no, I don't think we're ready to pay for it. And I think you're right.
I agree. I think the Green movement isn't near. I think it's actually very small. It's the mouse. It's the mouse that's pushing the elephant. And what's really going on? There was a recent poll just a few days ago that said basically the people who support the Green Party are people who don't necessarily support environmentalism. They just don't like any of the other parties. They're looking for a protest party.
True.
And they're not as hilarious as the rhinos, but there's someone else you can vote for and still say, well, at least I voted. So that's what they say is a mile wide and an inch deep type support. It's not really that they're in favor of the Green agenda. They're just in favor. They're just not willing to vote for the other parties. And I think that's discussed with government and the political process in general.
Does it surprise you, though, that the Liberals, such a known party in Canada, would base, so far, it looks like a campaign on this green shift? Does it surprise you?
It doesn't surprise me because of Dion's campaign coming into the leadership contest. He campaigned with as a green tie wearing green Liberal. The most bizarre association. I mean, think about what he's done. He's taken 30, 40 years of associating the color red, the Liberal color red, with the Canada and the red flag. He's taken that and just thrown it in the garbage and said, we're the Green Party. It's the most insane marketing ploy I've ever seen in my life, and I think it's going to haunt him horribly. It was a bad thing. He thought, at the time, all the newspapers were full of green this and green that, and he said, great, I'm going to release a green platform and everyone will love me. And
think it's a mistake?
Yeah, because the economy tanked right after that. And so now he's left with a thing that says, we're going to raise taxes.
No.
What? That's your campaign going into this?
But then, ironically, there's a campaign promise to take that same money that he makes through the green shift and put it back into taxpayers' wallets.
Well,
that's what he's saying.
Yeah.
Before we go for our break, let's go now to Dale on line 4. Hi, Dale. You're on the line.
How you doing?
Fine, thank you.
I got a question for the gentlemen that are sitting there. Our country used to be tax-free years ago. When was it they were tax-free? And why isn't we can't have 1 year where the government doesn't tax the people?
Dale, we're going to go for a break now, and we'll allow our guests to respond after the break. Stay tuned. Hello again, and welcome back to Viewpoints on the Line. We're going to go down to our second subject matter shortly, but Dale called and asked a question about taxes. And Paul, during the break, you were giving us a little bit of a historical rundown here. Right. Yes.
Well, in 1917, because of World War I, the federal government started taxing income, and it was supposed to be a temporary thing, but they just kept doing it. And attempts to challenge that have not been successful because courts are appointed by the Prime Minister and the Minister, so it doesn't change. Mm-hmm. But yeah, there was a time at which income tax was not imposed by the federal government. In fact, in the province of Ontario, we didn't have income tax until 1969 when the Progressive Conservatives brought in socialised health care. It was meant to pay for
social welfare, though, it's a tax drainer, but at the same time, you've got one camp that's for it, and the other that's totally against it because they feel like it's all on their back.
Yeah.
So it's a big one in terms of election campaigning. Would you say so?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've got what's called progressive rates of taxation in the country. So not only do people who make more pay more, they pay at a higher rate. And I mean, that's classic Marxism. That was in the Marxist, the Communist Manifesto. That was institute a progressive rate of income tax. And that's what we've got as a leftover from 20th century leftist thought. I think it's starting to reverse a bit, but it's a major hangover, and government's getting more and more expensive. So
that's right. And we're going to move on to our second subject matter now. Well, it's the 7th anniversary of 9/11, the day those trade centers went down, and there you have it up on your screen as a reminder. But now we're existing in post-9/11, the day I can say the world changed. Now, did it change for the better? Meaning, all of the changes that we've seen implemented worldwide, security and so on, was it needed? Was it really a change in era where we had to stand up and take note? For instance, the airport security, some of you are saying that it's too tight. Others are saying, well, it's absolutely needed because the last thing we want is a repeat of 9/11. And on the other hand, we also have in Canada the Anti-Terror Act that took effect. Some say it's a violation of human rights, but yet nothing has really made the headlines in terms of people's violations of human rights under this Anti-Terror Act, unless you want to bring up something that the public should know about. How do you feel about it? Do you think we've become a paranoid country? 9/11 is something nobody wanted to see, but how do you feel about the world today? Do you think Canada is paranoid? Let us know, and I'm going to start with you on this one, Al. What do you think?
Absolutely, I feel we're paranoid.
Too paranoid, Al?
Too paranoid, I think. We've adopted this fear culture out of the States, and it's a big concern of mine. And let's face it, we can put in all the security measures we want, but it's not going to stop terrorism. Terrorism is as old, if not older, than conventional war. If we concentrate just on the domestic flight security situation, and we look at what measures we're doing and what is the likeliness of that happening again with commercial airliners, which I think we've pretty well limited any chance of that happening again with our security measures at a huge cost. However, there's.
Was it worth it though? Was it worth it?
I don't. I think what is not worth it, excuse me, is the fact that now we're being screened by multinational governments, and I mean the freedom of information, personal information, is a big concern of mine, and who's got that information and what's being used with it. And let's face it, I mean, it still isn't difficult for somebody to get in a private aircraft and fly it into a building, and how do you stop that? So, I mean, it's a difficult thing to try to measure, and it's one of those situations that governments can exploit and develop further into a police state, and that's always a big concern of mine.
Paul, how do you feel about this one?
Well, yeah, I mean, there can be. In any crisis is what governments can use, and it's the only thing they can use to get people willing to violate their own freedom. So historically, we just keep doing it. I mean, think about the October crisis. That was what a change. October crisis in 1970. Following that, the Mulroney government came in and said we've got to have a different kind of war measures, a different kind of martial law, something that times out. There was fear that Canada's government was getting too powerful. Now we fear, Canada's government isn't powerful enough. And we start doing things like imposing these not even search, but just seizure laws, seizure of things from people who haven't even been charged with a crime yet. because they might one day use them as a crime. They'll take their computers, their cars, and all they have to prove is that they might, on a balance of probabilities, might use these in a crime. Absolutely insane. We've had these laws in Ontario since 2001, and I think that they need to be eliminated. But seizure is a little bit different. Grabbing people's property for no good reason is different than being cautious.
Of course,
you know, getting on a plane. I think, you know, going through.
It's there.
Yeah, if you're going through you know, the check-in, you know, you're passing through the X-ray machine or whatever. I have no problem with that. If I'm carrying something I shouldn't be carrying on a plane, like a gun, I draw the line at things like nail clippers and hairpins, bobby pins. But I mean, you know, knives and guns. Yeah, you know, there are people who try to bring them on. They ought not to be there, and we need to screen. Yep.
Okay, let's go now to Gail on line 4. Hi, Gail. You're on the line. Go ahead, Gail. Now, we're going to go for a break now, but before we do, we're asking you the question. Of course, we're in a world that forever changed, 9/11. Today's the anniversary, the 7th. Do you think that we've gone overboard in Canada in our efforts to protect ourselves? For instance, the Anti-Terror Act, and not only that, but extra security, the way we have it in the airports. Do you think it's necessary? We're going to go for a break. We'll return after this. Stay tuned. Hello again, and welcome back to Viewpoints on the Line. We're continuing to ask you the question, in the post-9/11 climate, do you think that Canada is paranoid? Or do you agree with the measures that we've taken in terms of airport security and in terms of the Anti-Terror Act? How do you feel about it? Call us and let us know how you feel. In fact, right now we have a very interesting player on the phone line, Julian Fantino, OPP Commissioner, and he's also former Commissioner of Emergency Management for the City of Toronto. Julian Fantino, are you there?
I'm here, thank you. And actually, it was emergency management for the province of Ontario.
For the province of Ontario, yes.
Yeah.
And Julian, we're asking the public the question, and of course our guest today, whether Canada has been paranoid since 9/11 took place. We'd like to know how you feel about this particular question to start.
Well, there's absolutely no paranoia involved. This is a new reality, if you will, that we are in fact vulnerable. We are a very target-rich society, environment, if you will. And we need to be very conscientious and concerned about terrorism. Is about making a statement. That statement can be made just about anywhere. So, no, there's no paranoia here. It's just a reality that we have to accept.
Can you give us a little bit of insight as to incidents, perhaps, not necessarily specific, that have taken place that will cause you to say that we're not being paranoid and that we do need to be on some heightened alert here in Canada?
Well, you know, without giving away any trade secrets, it's no surprise to any of us that for all of our efforts to frustrate the activities of terrorists or those who want to engage in that activity, we too need to be very conscientious about the fact that Canada has been mentioned in terrorist kind of language. We also know that there is sympathetic individuals and organizations within Canada that have terrorist kinds of backgrounds. You know about some of the different entities that have been basically made illegal by the Canadian government as being sympathetic or otherwise supporting terrorism. So, you know, the globalization of terrorism now is certainly something that Canada needs to be very vigilant, very concerned and conscientious about. And we've had investigations here that have had international ties, if you will, to terrorist groups and so forth. So there's no escape from the fact that the globalization of travel and technology and communications have also brought a dimension of threat to Canadian society from the terrorist threat.
Now, there are those who believe, and they purport, that if terrorists are really out to get you, they're going to get you anyway. How do you meet that?
Well, you do everything that you can to frustrate the efforts. A lot of it has to be in the area of intelligence gathering and networking with the national security agencies, law enforcement agencies across the world, and that's certainly one thing that's improved significantly, not only in Canada but worldwide. I can tell you that there's a lot of work being done to frustrate the efforts of wannabe terrorists or those who are intent on carrying out terrorist attacks on not only Canadian society but the free democratic world. So you just have to work at it. And I suppose one of the issues that comes up is what exactly can you quantify? And I don't know what you can do about that, in that we really don't know in a lot of cases what we have prevented or what we have been able to frustrate, but we know we have.
Now, these efforts have been collaborative, and I know that as Commissioner of the OPP, there is a department, if you can explain us about it, an anti-terrorism section of the OPP. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, we, like every other major law enforcement agency and national security agency, have had to focus on this area. I mean, for the longest time, we have been very diligent and working hard on organized crime and those kinds of issues. But with this new threat, if you will, and certainly manifested in the most horrible way 7 years ago today, we had to look at the bigger picture, that Canada is a free and democratic society that would be and has been, I think, the focus of terrorist groups. And so our unit, the anti-terrorism unit of the Ontario Provincial Police, works very diligently and very cooperatively with the whole of the international law enforcement community and national security community to safeguard our interests, our citizens, and our communities in this country, and our citizens beyond.
Yes, now, one final question. As former top cop for Toronto and now OPP commissioner, I'd like to know what your response is to a Calgary professor who, his advice was, we need to expand these anti-terror laws to include those members of gangs, that, in effect, gangsters are basically city terrorists. How do you feel about this?
Well, yeah, I understand what the intent is. I understand that gangs can, in fact, terrorize communities as they do. We see an awful lot of that. But I think we have to draw a distinction between international terrorist groups and those domestic, basically criminal elements that certainly are a big challenge and a big concern to us. So I would like to think that we can deal with both of those issues with the appropriate legislation, the proper tools, and the resources that are so critical today in dealing with these issues, either at the local level or internationally.
OPP Commissioner Julian Fantino, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure, and take care.
And we're going to go for a break now. When we come back, we're going to continue to ask you the question, do you think that Canada is being over-vigilant? You've heard OPP Commissioner Julian Fantino. How do you feel about it? We're going to return after this. Stay tuned. Hello again, and welcome back to Viewpoints on the Line. Well, you heard the viewpoint of OPP Commissioner Julian Fantino in this post-9/11 climate, asking you the question, do you think, as Canadians, we're too vigilant, or do you think we're doing the right thing? Let's go now to Ted on line 4. Hi, Ted. What do you think?
Good afternoon, Christine.
Good afternoon.
On the first point, absolutely Elizabeth May should have been allowed in these debates, and I really appreciate the comment of your guest that if a party can bring 50% plus one candidates, potential candidates, to the table, then they should be allowed. We live in a democracy. Secondly, yes, I believe we do live in a climate of fear. It seeps over from the United States, and to listen to the commissioner of the OPP saying, well, you know, we can't quantify it, and we can't tell you about these terrible things that are going to happen, but we know we've prevented them. In risk assessment, you evaluate your risk, and you take reasonable steps. And I don't consider arresting people and not giving them access to the information that led to their arrest so that they can defend themselves. That's not a reasonable step. It really threatens our democracy.
Ted, thanks for calling in. And I agree on that notion that, Al, you brought forth, and you did too, Paul, that such incidents could lead to a violation. But let's be fair, since 9/11, and that's a long time, 7 years, we really have not been seeing any front page news about people's rights getting violated left, right, and center due to the Anti-Terror Act. And that, to me, speaks for itself. I think that proves to be a clean record there, because trust me, there are publications that would put that front page right front and center if such violations were even remotely taking place. But thanks for your concern, because one thing I have to tell the two of you, and I'd like to hear your response, is when you're being threatened repeatedly, and Al-Qaeda did issue another threat recently, before 9/11, if that threat became public, that, hey, those towers are going to go down, you would have probably heard the same thing, we're being paranoid, it's not going to happen. When we saw those towers come down, it was a shock to everyone. It became surreal. Most people, if you ask them, what were you doing that day when you saw those towers came down, they could tell you. Yep. They could tell you, because it's something that was freeze-framed in your mind. You would never imagine that something such as that could take place. When you look at the rest of the world on what's happening, most terrorist attacks are actually Muslims against other Muslims. You've got the fight between the Sunnis, the Shiites. It's a really real war going on there. And given the threat, given our democracy, do you really think that we're being too paranoid? I mean, I'm not comfortable either with the approach of sitting back, waiting for what we see abroad to come here. I'd like to hear your feedback on this. I'm not sure we're aware as Canadians.
Sure.
We don't have that atmosphere.
I think a lot of people don't go around thinking about, there's a Muslim terrorist sleeping under my bed. I don't think they worry about
No, we don't want to do that. We don't want to do that.
So I don't think paranoia has gone to that level.
In this country.
Not in this country.
No.
And I think that's a good thing, that it hasn't gotten to that level.
Because then they win.
Right. But I think that there is not enough concern about different things. For example, we don't take much concern about the threat of theocracy. We don't take in this country, nearly as much as in the U.S., the idea that, religious commandments in various texts, that kind of thing, should not be the basis for government policy. And if we don't strengthen our commitment to, sort of a more scientific approach to whether or not the law is going to be imposing, the government's going to be using force to stop someone doing, take, for example, global warming. Global warming should be based upon science, demonstrable evidence, not upon someone thinks because they made a model that the whole world's going to melt down.
But then again, you get to the whole point again, and we're going outside of the subject today. What is science from that point of view? Because you've got as many scientists, even though people that believe in the Big Bang Theory will refute that, but go do your Google searches for those scientists who do support creationism, and they'll say, well, it doesn't make sense. Who's ever seen an explosion amount to such a wonderful creation in terms of what we see as order in our society? So even from the point of view of science, there's large disagreement as to what constitutes science in that form, the unknowns.
I agree there's always going to be debate. I'm just saying, you sort of take that lesson from the Christian Bible and say, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar, render unto God that which is God's, and that way, when we're rendering unto Caesar, what we're doing is we're saying, to live in this world, we govern according to the facts of this world. To live in the afterlife, you govern in accordance with whatever and we don't talk about the government of this earth, we're talking about the government of your own decision making. So if you want to make decisions that you think are consistent with an afterlife, do so, but not by violating the rules of living on this earth.
Do you see that happening here, though?
Yeah, I do. I think that when you start seeing people saying that the basis for government is, well, 50% plus one of us want it to happen, so go out there and start fining people, taxing people, imprisoning people because we want it. As soon as you replace facts and evidence and logic with what people merely want, then
Yes,
you're opening the door
yes.
to any kind of mysticism or irrationality or UFO conspiracy theories that you want. I mean, you could literally have people say 50% plus one of us believe that a UFO landed in the desert, and therefore we want a law that prohibits living in the desert.
Thoughts there, Al?
Going back to the original question, I've never felt a terrorist threat against myself or my family in this country. I've always felt the best anti-terrorist defense was a foreign policy, and I've always felt we've had a positive one, and we've always played a role as a peacekeeper that didn't attract negative attention. What I do see as a terrorist threat is when a guy like Fantino can bug my phone without a search warrant. To me, that's the biggest threat that we should all be concerned with, and these are and this is a policy that he's pushing and pushing and pushing. And for more control. What I want to know is how much has Fantino's budgets increased as a result of this whole war on terror? And I'm paying for it.
Al, I hear you, and I know that there are those who agree with you, but I'll tell you, those people that went into that building on 9/11, if you were to ask, unfortunately they're dead, they're gone. Now, if we were to ask them, did you feel the threat before you went into that building? They would answer no, because they wouldn't have gone. We don't always feel the threat. And I'm just being fair here, because there are two sides of this.
I can appreciate that.
We don't always feel that threat.
I can appreciate
Yes.
that, but if let's get down to basics. We weren't attacked. The Americans were attacked. If
But we're threatened. We're repeatedly threatened.
Well, who's threatening
Yes.
us, and who's the official guy that's threatening us? I mean, the way the world
The
works
network,
behind the
Al-Qaeda,
scenes.
we've got terrorism going on here.
Who's
the Qatar
Al-Qaeda,
family.
though? Who's Al-Qaeda?
The Qatar family is an example. These people have been the father in and out of jail in Pakistan,
Okay,
in various places abroad. It's been proven. We know that terrorist cells do exist within our country.
Okay.
And from the point of view of that, how do we respond to that?
Well, I mean, I'm always concerned about who's threatening who and who they really are. I mean, Al-Qaeda isn't a part of the UN. We don't know who Al-Qaeda is. We do know that there are cells that have a special interest in promoting this
And they've been found in
anti-war.
the hills of Afghanistan.
Absolutely. And
Pakistan.
I mean, you just don't know who's threatening who and the real root of their origins. So, I mean, that's always a big concern of me.
And then again, look what happened in Britain. You see, these things are turning up. We're going to go for a break. We'll be back after this. Stay tuned.
Yeah, look what happened in Britain.
Hello again. Welcome back to Viewpoints on the Line. Going on to topic number 3. It's going to be very short, but more of one of those what I call sound bites. You get to see what the topic is. No armed officers in schools. Trustees say. Now, 2 trustees in Toronto are feeling we don't want to have officers in our schools. Some of these schools are high risk, where violence may have happened, like with Jordan Manors, on the school premises. So parents end up feeling, well, what about my child going to school? Is my child safe? But the 2 of you are parents. Do you want to see armed officers in your child's school?
Not at all. In fact, I talked to my son about it today, and he said, when he was reading the article, and we were talking about it, about putting armed security guards in the schools, he said, why? And that really sums it up to me. And I live in a small town, granted, and everything, but I mean, are things really that bad? I think what we need to do is a bigger police presence. And I mean,
what about some of those schools, though, particularly in these urban centers where a lot of violence takes place and kids regularly have guns and knives? How do you feel about
that's a police issue. I mean, it isn't. I don't think it's up to school boards to. I would be I would be scared to have my son in such a school.
So would I. But would you feel better if there were officers in the school?
I think the purpose of having the officers there is so they have their ear to the ground. They know which kids are the trouble kids and which ones they aren't.
So you're not opposed to this for certain schools?
If the school has one incident of someone bringing a knife or a gun to school, I want an officer in there if my kid's in there. And I think the trustees are confusing the presence of guns with the presence of danger. You know, a gun in a police officer's hand.
Because once a police officer is present, they're going to have a gun. So even the headline and the article itself left me kind of scratching my head. What are they talking about? Because an officer carries a gun. Even years ago, when bullying became in the forefront, it was a major issue happening in the schools. There was a lot of police and school collaboration on the notion of community policing, and cops were there, even talking to the classroom kids. These are armed officers. So I'm wondering, do you see a difference here, or is it how it's presented by the media and by these wards?
I think it really comes down to the whole idea that guns don't murder people, but they sometimes prevent them from being murdered, and it all depends on who's holding that gun and the morality behind it. If someone's flashing a gun as a show of bravado, that's a person who's dangerous. If he's wearing a gun on his holster and he's wearing a badge, that's a reassurance. But I don't need that kind of presence in a school, a country school, where everything's pretty calm. And why put everybody on edge? I didn't grow up with it. It wasn't necessary. But certainly there are schools where there are guns, and the principals know there are guns, and there needs to be police.
And then there's the role of the principal, too. That zero tolerance on violence, that's another issue.
And what about civil rights? I mean, where will that end up? Are we going to start searching kids at the door? Or, is somebody, the officer suspects somebody has something, is he going to infringe upon his rights and search him, search his locker? I mean, these are all issues that we have to deal with first before we can just start arming our schools.
One thing we certainly need to do is have discipline in our school system, and it's got to start somewhere, and that's all the time we have for today. See you again next time. I'm Christine Williams, and from all of us, thank you for watching.